What is the difference between a spirit and a ghost? And what can science tell us about the paranormal, and how do we communicate with those who have passed on? How can we tell if there are signs that the spirit of our loved ones are reaching out to us? After all, can't they simply choose a more direct approach to communicate with us? Why do some remain earthbound when they die while others cross over? Can a spirit of someone you never knew in life befriend you? And do our pets try to communicate with us from the other side? Get ready to join me and paranormal author and medium Rob Gutro as we delve into these intriguing topics and more. Well, greetings and welcome, fellow truth seekers. You are listening to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. So great to be back here with you once again. Yes, we are living in some crazy times right now, and hopefully you all are staying safe and trying to make it through this crazy pandemic that we are all dealing with. And I'm really hoping tonight that I can help you escape for a little while at least, kind of leave those troubles behind. And I've got paranormal author and medium Rob Gutro joining me on the show. And Rob has written a lot of books on the paranormal and his experiences as a medium. It's so exciting to have him joining me on the show, and I'm really looking forward to picking his brain. I've got my whole list of questions ready for him, and I really hope you're going to enjoy the show as well. And if you haven't been over to the Facebook page, please pay us a visit over there at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal. And also hop over to the website and pay us a visit there at passion, the number 4, the paranormal.com. And there you can catch up with past episodes. You can check out some cool Passion for the Paranormal merchandise. And you can also sign up to receive our newsletter. And just understand there's no risk to doing that. We're not going to put you on any other email, any other emails. We will not share your email information with anyone. You can simply share it on the website, and we will send out the newsletter to you. All right. Other thing I wanted to mention is whatever podcast app you're using, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. That's so important. And that really helps us to keep moving forward and help the show to grow. And if you know of a friend, family member, or coworker you think that would like to tune into the show, please share a link with them. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into the discussion with Rob. I really hope you enjoy tonight's show, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion with him. Okay, so my guest tonight is Rob Gutro, and Rob is an author and a meteorologist by trade who learned as a teenager he had the ability to talk with spirits and uses science in order to explain ghosts and spirits. Rob has written 7 books on the subject of the paranormal and his experiences as a medium, to include his latest book, Case Files of Inspired Ghost Tracking. Rob, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight.
Well, thank you for having me, Corey. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it is. It's a pleasure. And, wow, you've got quite a resume with all the books you put out now. Maybe if you can, before we get into some of the discussion on that, maybe if you can take us back to that first experience, because I think I read you had your first experience as a teenager. So maybe if you could take us back and explain to us how that all came about.
Sure. It's something that I've never forgotten. I was about 13 years old. It's quite shocking. It was to me at the time. It's how I found out that something was different about me. After my grandfather passed away in December of 1975. In 1976, in July, he appeared to me in full color when I was home with the family dog, and he scared the daylights out of me. So, as a 13-year-old, you have no idea what's going on. So I ran outside and I stayed there until my parents came home. And when my mother and father returned from where they were, and my brothers were out, I have 2 brothers, I told my parents. I have a very good relationship with my parents, which was good because I could tell them anything. And my mother was not surprised. So that made me wonder what was going on. And she actually explained that she had this ability, but she was afraid to use it. And she did not know if any of her kids had it, but now she did. So that was the first experience. And then as I grew older, things would just happen on rare occasion. But when my puppy Buzz, passed away in 2005, he reawakened my abilities like crazy. And he became the world's best canine communicator from the afterlife, and inspired me to write my first book, Ghosts and Spirits.
Wow, interesting. Now, talk about, because you're also, your main profession is in science. How do you
Yes.
how do you kind of how do you balance the two? Because I can imagine that there's some people in your field that are not really open to this sort of stuff. So talk about that balance and how you manage that.
You're absolutely right. You have to be careful who you speak to about this in the science field. But my take on as a scientist, as a meteorologist, my take on the paranormal is that eventually science is going to catch up to it, and we'll be able to explain the paranormal using science, and then it will just be normal. But the way I come at the paranormal is that it's all about energy to me, because there is a law that in science called the law of conservation of energy that states that energy can't be destroyed, only transformed. Now, if you think about it, the human body has physical energies in it. We have the blood pumping through our system. We have thoughts, and they are measured by scientists, by science, as little electrical impulses in your brain. So, what I've come to put together is that the energy that is within us couples with our memories, personality, and our knowledge, and we make a choice after we die as energy to either stay here, earthbound, and I call that a ghost, or we cross over and join the energies of the universe or heaven or whatever you want to call the other side. And I call that a spirit. So a ghost is earthbound and a spirit has crossed over. And they both use different kinds of energies to communicate with us.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because some people use those terms interchangeably, spirit or ghost. And I'd like to get your take on, so can we communicate with both of them, first of all? So a spirit, they've already moved on from this plane. And is it just as easy for us to communicate with a spirit who's passed on, or with a ghost who's in this earthbound plane?
Well, it's pretty easy to communicate with both of them, but we really have to trust our feelings, and that's really what it amounts to. The only trick is, though, ghosts are earthbound at a location of their choosing, a fixed location of their choosing, so they can't move around. They can't move around from where they have chosen to dwell for their afterlife. Spirits, however, who have crossed over and gone to heaven or paradise or whatever, they can appear anywhere, anytime, any place, and we can call upon them to help us. There's a couple of other distinctions here between the energy they use and the energy they emit, and I can get into that if you wish. But dreams are the easiest way for those in spirit who have crossed over to communicate with the living, to let us know they're okay. Ghosts don't seem to have that ability to come into our dreams.
Yeah, and this is the other interesting thing. I am a paranormal investigator. I really don't do as much investigating as I used to. Now, those people that are involved in the paranormal field, and say we pick up a voice we consider to be an EVP on a digital voice recorder. Do you think most of the time those voices captured are those of the earthbound plane, or is it possible that some of these we're capturing maybe those of spirits?
They could very well be both. I've worked several cases where there were both an earthbound ghost and the spirit of a loved one had also come into the house, but the spirit had come into the house to protect the family from the earthbound ghost.
And that's interesting. I'm curious to get your take on why you think ghosts stay in this earthbound plane. Do they have some sort of opportunity to move on and choose not to? What's your take on what's going on with, I don't know if you want to call them earthbound spirits, I guess we'll just say ghosts. What's going on there? Why do they choose to stay?
Sure. Well, I've learned that ghosts stay for a number of reasons. And, of course, everybody is different because they maintain their personalities when they stay. So, and they have their own reasons. But for the most part, some stay because they think they can help their family overcome their grief of loss, which they cannot, actually. They can only do that, really, if they cross over and become a spirit. Others stay because they love the place in which they grew up. Yet others stay because they may have been confused where they died, if they died in an accident, or if they were murdered, or if they died in a hospital and they're unfamiliar with the place, or a prison. And yet, here's an interesting thing I learned too, is that some people who are very devout in their religion will actually stay behind as an earthbound ghost, because when we die, we have kind of a recollection of how we lived our life, and we know all the good things we did, and we know all the bad things we did. And the people who are the most devout in their religion totally fear crossing over, because they fear going to some other place. So what they need to know, though, everybody needs to know, no matter if you're religious or not religious, everybody needs to cross over, because there's nothing but love, acceptance, and positive energy on the other side.
Yeah, and that's reassuring to hear, and I've heard that with many guests I've had on this show, that, perhaps this fear of judgment keeps us earthbound. And or what if it's a person who was an atheist and doesn't believe there's anything on the other side there? Is that sometimes the case as well?
They could, but often I've found that that people who don't have a belief in any kind of God cross right over. So, and the same thing for victims of suicide and other different instances. They all cross over. They all have the ability to do that, and they cross over freely. And the reason they do that, even if they don't believe in any kind of religious figure, is because the light acts as a draw. Plus, our relatives on the other side are actually calling to us. Relatives and pets on the other side are calling to us to cross over. So that's more of an incentive to go.
Now, what about this thought you hear that people who are involved in some sort of natural disaster, they experience death in a very, very sudden and abrupt fashion? Perhaps they're in a car crash, something like that. And I've heard this notion that they don't even realize they're dead. And I'd like to get your take on that.
Sure, that's actually very true. One of the very first experiences I had just before my puppy had passed was that, actually just after he passed, was that I encountered a man who had died in a car accident. While I was going on my way to work, I drove past an intersection, an off-ramp from a highway. And as I drove by there, I saw him standing there, confused. And I thought, what in the world? That was an earthbound ghost. So I had called my partner and asked him, who he left for work like 2 hours earlier. I asked him if there was a car accident there. And sure enough, he said yes. A pickup truck had come off the highway and crossed the road and was struck by a truck. And there were police there, and they were taking a body away. So that man was standing there. He was still confused. So as I was driving by, I told him to move on and look for the light.
Interesting. So you actually saw the apparition of this person? Is that the way this happens a lot for you? I mean, are you actually seeing what is a full body apparition of earthbound ghosts?
Usually, no. But usually I actually see them in my mind. So they share with me telepathically. Because they're energy, and thoughts are energy, they can project themselves in my mind. So when I am on a paranormal investigation, I carry with me a blank book, and I write down everything I get, and I also sketch out the appearance of the ghost. And since I've been with Inspired Ghost Tracking for the last 10 years, every single ghost that I have sketched out has been verified by the homeowners.
Wow, that's intriguing stuff. So
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so these are just kind of a mental image that pop into your mind of these people, and then you hear a voice telepathically, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes. So I can see them in my mind. I can hear them in my mind. Sometimes I can smell scents that they generate. I can feel them sometimes if they touch me or poke me. And Dr. Mudd, who was the doctor who became famous for treating John Wilkes Booth against his better judgment because he was kind of forced into it after the assassination of President Lincoln. Dr. Mudd was poking me the entire time I was in his historic home. So, and spirits have also made me feel them too. When one of our dogs passed, I asked my dad and our friend Ed to be in the room with us in the vet and to take our dog Sprite over when Sprite was passing. And I felt cold hands on each of my elbows, and I knew my dad was on one side and Ed was on the other side.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. It really is. I've talked to and had other psychic mediums on the show. There seems to be this common thread, either what I've heard of them through other interviews or when I've had them on the show, is this tendency to want to pull away from this ability you have. You know, not other people are not always as accepting as some others are about, you know, seeing or conversing with spirits. And, you know, you already mentioned people in your field that can be a challenge with. Did you have a tendency to do that as well? It sounds like you did have some family support. So I've talked to others who family members have even told them you need to, you know, stop talking about this stuff. Talk about that experience of it for you.
Sure. Well, my family has actually been pretty supportive. I have two brothers, an older one and a younger one, and neither one of them have this ability. But they were certainly they certainly came to believe it when my dad passed away in 2008, because my dad helped me prove to them and my mother that he was at his own wake and his own funeral. And the way in which he did that was that through a handkerchief. So my mother and father were married for 53 years. And during that time, my dad used to use handkerchiefs. And my mother always told him they were disgusting. She didn't want to see them. She didn't want to touch them. And she made him wash them separately. She said she didn't want her, his snot on her clothing. So,
Sure.
During the funeral for my dad, my mother was crying into Kleenex, and it was crumbling. And I saw my dad. I actually visibly saw my dad on the pulpit of the church, and he walked over to me and he said to me very loudly in my right ear, "Rob, tell your mother to use my handkerchief." And I stopped, and this was during the funeral, and I looked at him, and I just said, "What?" out loud, and he said it two more times, and he was very firm about it. So I said, "Okay, I'll tell her." And my mother said, "Who are you talking to?" And I said, "Talking to Dad, and he told me to tell you to use his handkerchief." And I will never forget the look of my mother's face. Her eyes just opened wide, and her mouth opened, and she stopped, and she reached into her purse, and she pulled out my dad's handkerchief. For the first time in her life, she had one of his handkerchiefs.
Wow. That's amazing. And the other question I wanted to ask you is, now, when you had that experience as a teenager, that was kind of your first big experience. Did you have regular contact with spirits after that occurrence? I mean, was it a regular thing after that, or how did that kind of unfold?
No, as a matter of fact, it was actually very spaced out. I only had. It was very rare that I had another experience until my puppy passed in 2005, and there was only one that stood out between that time. And the reason is because when you're a developing medium, you can get so involved in your own life that you don't open up to what else is around you. It's just like children. Children's logical minds do not develop. Are not developed when they're young, and they're able to see ghosts and spirits. But when we learn things, when we learn logic and we try to explain things away and we get absorbed into our own lives, we start blocking things out. And that's what happened to me. I did live in a house that wound up being haunted when I was going to college. It was haunted by a Civil War soldier, and I thought he was outside the house, and it turned out he was inside the house. And I wrote about that in my Ghosts and Spirits book. That was quite shocking, but it wasn't until my puppy started coming through with all kinds of signs, musical signs, movement signs, tactile signs, everything and anything, that everything started to come. And that was 2005.
Now, are there people that just act kind of like beacons to spirits and ghosts? And if so, what is it that draws these spirits or ghosts to these sorts of people?
I truly believe it's energy, Kari. Spirits and ghosts, because they're beings of energy, they can read the energy of living people. So that energy, it's like reading an aura or seeing an aura on somebody to them. They can sense who has the ability to see them or hear them or feel them versus the people that really don't. So that's why mediums are able to pick up messages from them much more easily than, say, the average person.
Sure, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your experience in paranormal investigating. Now, I'm assuming you've done some of that just based on what you've already mentioned. But talk about your role in being involved in paranormal investigating and working with, say, paranormal groups.
Sure. After I published my first book, Ghosts and Spirits, which made the distinction between the two entities, I gave a talk at Inspired Ghost Tracking in Maryland. And right after I gave that talk, Margaret Ehrlich, who is the founder of the group, asked me to join the group as a medium. Now, at that point, I always like to say that I was a medium rare because I was still developing my abilities. But over time, with the group, especially in the last 10 years, I really have grown to prove everything that I've received. So, and the thing about working with a paranormal group is that you never know what kind of situation you're going to go into. We have gone into private houses, and the mediums, by the way, are never told anything about what's happening in the house. That's the way the group operates. Only the manager knows, because she does an interview with the family. The manager and one of the senior investigators, who is a tech person or a historian. The tech people usually go in first, and then the mediums go in another visit. But we have encountered earthbound ghosts. We have encountered dark energy. We have encountered portals opened by Ouija boards, which I highly recommend not using. We've also encountered more than one ghost, a ghost on an attachment, and there was one of our most famous cases is called the double murder ghost investigation, where two women were murdered in a home. And we figured that out, me and myself and another medium.
Wow. That's it kind of sounds interesting, yet a little bit scary. Now, were they talking to you and communicating with you? Did they want to share information to help solve their case? Or how did the communication with the double murder victims go?
Well, that was a very interesting case in itself. By the way, we also have photographic proof of one of the faces of one of the murder victims, and that's in the case files of Inspired Ghost Tracking, and it's also on the cover of my book, Lessons Learned from Talking to the Dead. Both women were talking to myself and the other medium. His name is Troy, and we were confused because, again, we came in there not knowing anything about the house or the history or the hauntings or anything. And finally we realized, I had asked Troy, I said, I am talking to a woman who is about 70 years old. And he said, well, I'm talking to a woman who's in her 30s. and we didn't understand what was going on. We said, at first we thought this was a domestic situation, but it turned out not to be that. And it turned out it was a woman and her daughter-in-law who were brutally murdered in the home by somebody.
Wow. Now, was the case solved? Was the person who committed the murders captured and imprisoned? What came about with that, or do you know?
So the historian Rhonda looked into that and got a modified police report, and it turned out that murder had happened several years before we were called in, and the murder was actually solved, and the killer is doing a double life sentence in a prison in Western Maryland. But the women chose to stay behind.
Interesting. Now, did they communicate with you why they were staying behind in the house?
They did. They said, we told them that their murderer was in prison for life, and they can leave the house and cross over into the light, but they didn't want to do that because they wanted to protect whatever family lived in the house afterward from anybody, from any murderer.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned Ouija boards, and you mentioned you discourage people from using them. Talk about, because you're working with Paranormal Group. Paranormal groups like to capture EVPs. How would that differ, say, working with a Ouija board versus, say, trying to capture spirit or ghost voices through EVPs?
So, yes. So our group doesn't believe in using Ouija boards because we've been in too many houses now where we've seen people use them, and they open doors to dark places. If we want to communicate with the spirit, we prefer to use EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, by asking a ghost, an earthbound ghost, a question, and having our digital recorders on, and then playing them back, either there or later, to find out what the answer is that we get. We also use other different techniques. We can use a light, like a motion-activated light, and ask a question, and ask the entity to light it up if the answer is yes or no. Just simple questions. But again, we went into a couple of different houses where people had used Ouija boards, and in one particular case, a portal was open to another side, and it was dark energy, and everybody in the house, and there were, I think, other 6 family members that lived there. Every single person in that house, when we came in to investigate, was physically ill with something.
Now, interesting, Rob. Would you classify that kind of activity as demonic, what you just described?
No. So the thing about me is I'm not a religious person at all, but I don't. What I think of as demons are not religious figures. As a scientist, I look at demons kind of differently. Demons and angels and so forth. As a scientist, I know that we have already cataloged, I think, about 3,800 exoplanets. Those are planets that orbit other stars. There's another 4,900, I believe, that haven't been cataloged yet, haven't been officially cataloged, but we found them, and there are quite a number of them in the habitable zone around a star, which means that they would likely support life, just like Earth does. So, and as a matter of fact, we know that there's a couple of moons in our own solar system that have water on them, and when there's water, there's usually life. So what my belief is that demons, what we call demons, are probably extraterrestrial life in another universe or solar system, and that energy can travel anywhere, just as we can as a spirit. And when it reaches here, they don't understand what humans are. They don't understand what we are. So they behave like a cornered animal, um, a cornered wild animal, and they behave in an aggressive, defensive way. And I think that's what demons really are.
Now, when you say dark energy, could it also just be that it is a person that's passed on and is earthbound and was a nasty person in life and possibly is a nasty person in death as well?
Absolutely, absolutely, Kari. I always say that because we maintain our personalities. If you're a nice person in life, you're a nice person in death. If you're a jerk in life, you're going to be the same in death. And that's why it's very hard as a medium to go into prisons, because there are some people who lived very hard lives and they were pretty brutal in life. So imagine being a medium and walking into a prison where there were people who died in there who were murderers, and they had no conscience about murdering somebody else, and now they're invisible.
Scary thought, isn't it?
Kind of crazy.
Now, I've never had the opportunity to investigate a former prison, but I can imagine that it's an interesting and probably a unique experience. Where have you been able to investigate any prior or what used to be a former prison?
I only went to one prison, and that was a prison it was the Maryland House of Correction, and they were tearing it down, and it was empty. And when when I went in there, there was just an awful lot of overwhelming energy, residual, very heavy, dark residual energy from the emotions that were in there. I didn't really stay in there very long. Oh, there is another prison that I went to, and that would be in Ireland, in Cork County, where I ran into quite a number of ghosts walking around and actually photographed one crossing a hallway.
Wow. Yeah, and that's a rare occurrence. I know as a paranormal investigator, that's just something you don't capture very often. So it's amazing when you can capture those sorts of things. The other thing that I want to talk to you about, because you just mentioned, bringing science into the paranormal. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the science side of this and how science fits into investigating the paranormal?
Sure, absolutely. So I mentioned ghosts and spirits are both beings of energy. So I want the listeners to think of a ghost or a spirit as a light bulb that doesn't have any power. What they need is energy in order to get strong enough to communicate, whether that means making a noise or touching you or any other thing. So the energies that ghosts and spirits both use are physical energies and emotional energies. By physical energies, I mean heat, light, water, and electricity. If you think about how ghosts will drain batteries for paranormal investigators, they're drawing that energy so they can get strong enough to do something, to show that they are present. Spirits use those same kinds of energy too. That's why places that are towns that have a lot of hauntings usually have a river running near it. That's water energy that's giving those ghosts the ability to communicate. The difference is in the emotional energies. Spirits of our loved ones who have crossed use faith, love, and hope. Those are the energies, emotional energies, that help them communicate with us, come back to us during birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, which is usually the times that spirits communicate with us throughout the year. Ghosts use negative emotional energy. That means fear, anxiety, depression, anger. Those are the things that that's the negative emotional energy that fuels a ghost. So if you go into a house that's haunted, you feel anxiety. What you're doing is you're plugging in that ghost to give them enough energy to do something. So the other part of the energy too, Kari, is that because they absorb negative emotional energy, they also emit it. So if you have a ghost in your house, you will find yourself being more short-tempered, feeling more anxiety, being more angry, more unsettled. So they radiate that negative energy. So it's a loop. That's why people who have a ghost in their house really need to have a team come in and cross them over.
Now, talk about this process of crossing somebody over. What do you do when you're trying to accomplish that, and how do you go about doing that?
Well, crossing over is all about the use of emotional energy, and it usually takes 3 or 4 of the team members of Inspired Ghost Tracking to do that. And what we do is we typically offer some kind of prayer of protection, because we want to protect ourselves from the negative energy that is a ghost. And then what we do is we often join hands, and we link. We have a physical link to join our emotional energy together. We concentrate on one part of the room where the ghost is, and we visualize a portal of white light opening up. And then, using the energy that we sense from the ghost, we call on the energies of the spirit that is connected to them on the other side. And we have one of their relatives in spirit, call to the ghost to help them cross over. And it's all about how we sense what's happening, and we try to convince the ghost to walk over there. But what's interesting is that we do get a confirmation. And this is weird, and it's happened every time we've crossed somebody over. We actually all feel a burst of warm air once that portal closes and that ghost crosses over.
Wow. Now, is there a short period of time where that light is present with somebody who has passed over, and then after a certain period of time it goes away? Or how? I've heard that before. I'm just curious what your take is on that.
That's exactly my feelings too. Is that we don't know how long that doorway to the other side opens up, or stays open. All I can assume is that usually it's about a week after we pass, because most of us stay behind and attend our own wakes and funerals. We want to see who came, just like my dad did.
Who loved us, right?
And then we lose the ability to open it.
Wow. Interesting stuff. I wanted to ask you about this idea of energy and the energy you bring. Say you're involved in paranormal investigating. How much of the energy you bring comes into play with the energy that you attract?
It is about ghosts and spirits being able to read the energy of living people in order for them to communicate with us. So that's why ghosts will more often go to somebody that they think, that they sense can help them. And the reason that most ghosts want help is to cross over. As you know, because you've done paranormal investigating, one of the most frequent EVPs that we get is help me. And help me, the reason they want help, what I found is that they want help crossing over because they realize they made a grave error, no pun intended, to stay behind in the afterlife, earthbound, and they don't have the ability to communicate with their loved ones in spirit.
Interesting. You talk about in one of your books how you were able to befriend another spirit. You referenced it early on in the discussion here, the spirit of Ed. Talk about how this spirit befriended you and how this relationship still continues.
Sure. It's actually one of my favorite books. It's called Kindred Spirits, When a Medium Befriends a Spirit. And so it's pretty uncommon to get to know a spirit so well that you feel like you have befriended them. But that's exactly what happened to me with this spirit named Ed. Now, Ed is somebody I never met in life. Ed passed away in 1996. And the reason Ed started coming to me is because when I met my partner, Tom, in 2005, Ed came along for the ride. Ed was Tom's late partner. Ed was a partner to Tom back in the 1990s. So Ed has always been around Tom, watching over him and taking care of him. My very first encounter with Ed was when we were driving back from visiting Tom's grandmother, and in the rear view mirror of my pickup truck, I saw Ed's face. That was pretty startling. So I pulled over immediately, of course, and Tom was in the truck, and I said, Ed is in the back seat. But what's interesting, and for the listeners to think about this, is think about how you would feel if your partner or your spouse was able to communicate with one of your exes that has passed away. You probably feel a little awkward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is that Ed has told me things that I couldn't possibly know about their time together, and their behavior, and his and Tom's behavior, and all this other stuff, and so it's funny. So the book is kind of it's kind of funny, and it's also serious, and it teaches people how spirits communicate in many different ways, the spirits of your loved ones. But one of the ways that I really got to know Ed very well is after getting messages from him for several years, 6 years, we decided that we were going to go meet Ed's father. And when we made that decision, Ed came to me for 2 weeks in a row and gave me all kinds of signs, symbols, and pictures that made no sense to me. In the book, Kindred Spirits, you'll find out that every single sign or symbol or picture that was quirky, from the things like a rowboat that's a kayak to the word jingle that has a special personal significance, all of those things helped prove that Ed was with every member of his family in the 2 weeks leading up to our visit. Also in the book, you'll read that Ed helped me prove to his dad that Ed did not commit suicide. And his father told me after that visit that he said for the first time in 15 years, he said, I can finally stop grieving. So
Wow.
It's a pretty crazy book.
That's deep stuff. You mentioned that I think in this particular book that you can learn to pick up on some of the signs that perhaps deceased loved ones might send, or friends that have passed on. What you've already touched on a little bit, maybe just a little bit more on what are some of those signs we can expect to see from loved ones who may be communicating with us?
Sure. There are a number of things. So as I mentioned in the beginning, dreams are the easiest way for spirit to let us know that they are okay. And I recommend that before everybody go to bed, they ask the spirit of their loved one to come into their dreams. And usually within a couple of weeks, you'll realize you'll have a dream of your loved one. But they can do things like they can lead you to somebody that looks like them. I met a woman who said that her mother passed, and she followed a woman in a car that resembled her mother 3 weeks after her mother died, and then she had to stop her own car and realize that, oh my God, my mother is dead, and I'm following this woman. I'm probably going to scare her. But she was so taken aback that this woman, this living person, looked like her mom. So they will lead you to somebody that looks like them, and that's the same with pets too. Pets will do that too, to remind us that they are very much around in spirit. They'll also drop things in front of us that, we'll find things that we may associate with them. Coins are actually an easy way for a spirit to communicate. Ed loved coins. Since Ed passed in 1996, and I connected with Ed, I have never found so many coins dated 1996 in my life. So look at the year, because that gives you a clue. Scents are another way. Like you may smell a perfume, or your grandmother's baking in the middle of nowhere, and you'll know your grandmother's around. My own mother when she passed away in 2013, she was very blunt about making sure that we knew she was around. We took a vacation in Germany last year, and I kept telling Tom that I said, my mother is definitely on this trip. I can feel her and my dad. And the quirky thing is, Corey, is that we were on a bus we took a river cruise, and then we got on a bus to go to another part. We're on the bus, and when I sent my mom there, we drove by a supermarket in Germany that had my mother's name, Norma. Now, my mother was Italian, but there was a huge sign. It had to be about 12 feet wide with big letters that said Norma. And I thought, okay, Mom, you can't make it any more clear than that.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question. Why do you think the communication is more the indirect route or signs versus just them communicating more directly with us?
Well, spirit really has to work really hard to get through to us. And it takes, again, it goes all the way back to what we talked about in the beginning, which is energy. It takes an awful lot of energy for a spirit to communicate with us. So that's why when people say to me, well, do you hear them talk to you in full sentences, and can you carry on a conversation? And the answer is no. It's very rare because it takes so much energy to do that. So what they do is they lead us to little things that we can see, as we pick up as clues that don't take as much energy as that.
Interesting. Talk a little bit about your connection with deceased pets and how you communicate with them.
Sure. So when my puppy Buzz passed, he was a Weimaraner. He passed in 2005. And it was a very tragic thing because I was walking him and his leash opened and he saw another dog on the other side of the street. He ran across the street and he was struck by a car right in front of me. For pet parents, you never forget when you lose a pet. As a scientist, I've read a lot of studies that will tell you that we grieve more deeply for our pets than we do for some people. And the reason we do that is because pets have the intelligence of a 3 to 5 year old child. I in my books, Pets in the Afterlife and Pets in the Afterlife 2, I use some scientific studies so that you understand how this all comes together. So Dr. Stanley Coren did an analysis of intelligence of dogs. He used dogs as a baseline. And he found they have an intelligence of a 3 to 5 year old child. So even though their body ages and they could be 15 or 16 years old, we always look at them as a 3 to 5 year old child. And as humans, we always know that we should not be outliving our own children. So that is why we grieve more deeply for our pets sometimes than we grieve for most people. And if you've been around your extended family over the holidays, there are some people there you're not going to be grieving for as much as you grieve for your own pet. Right?
I can attest to that, absolutely.
Yeah. So the other thing too is pets communicate much in the same way that humans communicate, but you have to understand that they do it in the same manner as if they were alive. So you could feel paw prints of a cat on the end of your bed. You could hear a bark or a meow, but it always sounds like it's coming from another room because it takes so much energy for a pet to communicate that way. They can lead you to another dog or cat that looks like them. Just as I mentioned earlier, that people can do that same very thing. But again, it takes energy. It takes a lot of energy. So music is another way, by the way, that pets can use to communicate their presence. So I write all about all the different ways that pets communicate, and I include stories from other people as well as the readings that I've given and confirmations. And the reason I write these books is to educate people so they don't need to pay a medium. They can just read about all the different ways and teach themselves. And you need to know that your pet's love will always connect you, and they'll be waiting for you on the other side. I could talk about pets in the afterlife for an hour or two, but there's much more.
Now, similar to humans, do pets also reincarnate?
They do. But similar to humans, they also wait for everyone they know in this life to pass away, and then they come back. And people have asked me before if their pets have reincarnated into their new dog or cat, and what I've learned is that no, they do not. They wait for you on the other side. But if you adopt a new dog or cat, your pet in spirit will come back and train your new dog or cat to have one habit or two habits that they had when they were alive, so that you'll know that your pet on the other side is still very much around.
Fascinating stuff. I wanted to share a story real quick that I had. I had two wiener dogs that were sisters. Recently passed over the last year or two. I was coming out of the bathroom one evening, and this is the only time other than having a memory flash in my head, I heard what sounded like, with the nails, the dog's nails, and they run on a hardwood floor. Well, we have hardwood floors upstairs. Mm-hmm. I heard what sounded like one of my dogs running across the hardwood floor, and it was amazing to me because I told my wife that story, and I think her response was, I think you thought you heard what you heard, but you were probably imagining that.
No, yeah, I'm sure you heard what you heard. It's actually very, very common that they do that, especially nails on the floor. And by the way, we have 3 wiener dogs and a Weimaraner, so I can relate.
Yeah, size-wise, that's one end of the spectrum to the other.
So, and jingling collars are another way that pets will let you know that they're there. Gosh, there's all kinds of things that they tell us to let us know they're there.
Interesting. Now, Rob, is there anything that has really frightened you since you've really developed this skill as a medium?
Well, I've met some spirits that we all like I said, we maintain our personalities. I have met some earthbound ghosts that were pretty nasty. There was one in Scotland, and I did not want in Greyfriars Bobby Cemetery, that's been known to be mean to people, and I sensed him, and I did not want to get anywhere near him. Other than that, there was only one other one, but I didn't learn how bad he was until after I left the property. We went, Inspired Ghost Tracking did an investigation at Cocky's Tavern in Maryland. I believe it's in Westminster. And I get the sense of a very irritated male ghost. And after I came home, the manager sent me a sound file, and she said, I want you to listen to this. This was in that room where you sensed that very hateful man. And I opened up the sound file, and it said in a male voice, "Kill Rob." And I said, I am not going back there.
Yeah, that can be a little bit unsettling. If you could talk a little bit about, as we kind of wrap up here, what are some things that we can do to better our chances of, one, communicating with spirits, and more importantly, communicating with loved ones, either pets or loved ones who have passed on?
Sure. So the first thing you need to do is really trust your feelings. I always like to quote Star Wars and say, "Trust your feelings, Luke," because it's really about reading energy. Also, ask your loved ones to come to you in your dreams. Dreams, again, are the easiest ways of communication that spirits can communicate with you. Usually look for signs around birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. If you think about it, that's when the living people acknowledge the other living people in their lives. And pets also do the same thing. And the reason pets do is because this has to do with energy. Pets can read our emotional energy. During birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, our emotional energy is at a much higher level because it's a time of excitement. And pets know when we're happy, when we're sad, when we're angry, when we're, depressed, when we're sick. They can read our emotional energies. So birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. Look for coins. Look for people that may or pets that may look like those that have passed. All of these things are signs. It's really just being aware. And I have to tell you, Kari, that everybody has this ability. It's about trusting it and paying attention. That's what it is. Have you ever walked into a room full of people and felt that you were kind of drawn to say hello to somebody, and conversely, there were other people you just kind of avoided? Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, and I think, I'd like to say that perhaps I'm maybe a small E empath. I seem to kind of sense people's emotions and such. Certainly not to the anywhere to the abilities that you have. And I think that I kind of get that feeling sometimes with people, or I've met people that seem to be familiar, and I've never met them before in my life. And, I'm just happen to be talking with them, and they just seem to have a familiar sense to them. And I often wonder, was that somebody maybe I conversed with in a previous life, maybe that I knew in a previous life, that sort of thing. So I've had those kinds of strange experiences that make me kind of question, maybe I did know that person in some other life.
Sure. And so for the people that you feel drawn to and the people that you feel kind of pushed away from, what you're doing is you're reading their energy too. And that's what mediums do. But mediums do that with people and pets on the other side. So it's, again, to me, it's all about energy, whether reading it, whether using it to be empowered, to communicate with a ghost or a spirit. Energy is the foundation of the paranormal.
Fascinating stuff, Rob. I really appreciate you joining me tonight. Any new books you have on the horizon, or any new work you're working on now?
Well, I actually have quite a few in the queue. My latest one is Case Files of Inspired Ghost Tracking, which has 18 chapters of different cases that we went into private homes, and one actual historic place, and everything is really weird and different. So that's kind of fascinating. Kindred Spirits just came out last year, and I am working on Pets 3 and 4. One will be about dogs, and the other one will be about cats. And I have Ghosts of in Ireland and Scotland. That one's also in the queue. So there's plenty of things coming up.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty busy, and I don't know where you find the time there, but it sounds like you got a lot of new work going to be coming out, or books coming out. We'll have to look out for those. Once again, Rob, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight. It's been a fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed it. And, have a great night. It's Easter night. Hopefully you had a great Easter. And once again, thank you for talking with me and joining me.
Thank you, Kari. And if anybody wants to reach me, they can go to robgutro.com or petspirits.com, and they can get a hold of me.
All right, Rob. Thanks again.
Thanks for your time.
All right. Well, that'll about do it for tonight's show, and a big thanks to Rob for joining me for that discussion. That was quite an intriguing discussion with him. And make sure you don't miss next episode, when I'll have longtime UFO contact researcher and author Kathleen Mardine joining me on the show. Kathleen is known very well in the UFO community. She lectures at different UFO conferences, and again, she's written many books on the subject, so excited to have her joining me on the show. So make sure you don't miss that one. Once again, thank you so much for tuning into the show, and stay safe, everybody, and look forward to the next episode.